Hello students, today's topic is limiting reagent. First, how to define the limiting reagent. The reactant which get finished first in multi-reactant reaction is known as limiting reagent or limiting reactant. The reactant which get finished first in multi reactant reaction is known as limiting reagent. Clear? How to define the limiting reagent? The reactant which get finished first in multi-reactant reaction is known as limiting reagent. For example, reactant A plus reactant B plus reactant C are react together to form product. This reaction is multi-reactant reaction. It means that there are three reactants. Clear? Multi means many reactants. So there are three reactants. So this reaction is known as multi-reactant reaction. According to this definition, the reactant which get finished first in the multi-reactant reaction is known as limiting reagent. Suppose carbon react with oxygen to form carbon dioxide. This reaction is the combustion reaction. This reaction is the combustion reaction. Clear? In this reaction, number of mole of carbon is 1 mole, 1 mole of oxygen to produce 1 mole of carbon dioxide. Clear? In this reaction, for the complete combustion of 1 mole of carbon, we required 1 mole of oxygen. Clear? In the second example, 2 mole of carbon react with oxygen to form carbon dioxide. This is also combustion reaction. This is also combustion reaction. In this reaction, for the complete combustion of carbon, that is number of mole of carbon is 2 mole and 1 mole of oxygen. Clear? 1 mole of carbon dioxide. Here, for the complete combustion of 2 mole of carbon, we required 2 mole of oxygen. But in the reaction, 1 mole of oxygen is given. So 1 more mole of oxygen is required for the complete combustion of 2 mole of carbon. So oxygen is the limiting reagent. Limiting reagent. Clear? Because in this reaction, oxygen reactant get finished first. Clear? The second point is the limiting reagent is always less than the required amount. The second point is it is always less than required amount for completion of reaction. It is always less than the required amount for the completion of reaction. In this example, 1 mole of for the complete combustion of 1 mole of carbon, we required 1 mole of oxygen. Clear? And in this example, for the complete combustion of 2 mole of carbon, we required 2 mole of oxygen. But in this reaction, the oxygen is 1 mole. Clear? So 1 more mole of oxygen is required. Clear? It is proved that it is always, that means limiting reagent is always less than the required amount. Clear? The required amount is 2 mole of oxygen for the complete combustion of 2 mole of carbon, but the number of mole of oxygen is 1 mole, so 1 more mole of oxygen is required. Clear? The third point is as soon as the limiting reagent get finished, the reaction get stopped. As soon as the limiting reactant get finished, the reaction gets stopped. Clear? As soon as the limiting reactant, that is limiting reagent, get finished, the reaction get stopped. Clear? In this reaction, the limiting reagent is oxygen. Clear? Because we know that the limiting reagent are those reactants which get finished first in the reaction. So the oxygen is the limiting reagent, so oxygen get finished first, and as soon as the oxygen reactant get finished first, the reaction get stopped. Clear? And the last point is all the other reactants are known as excess reactants. The fourth point is all other reactants are known as excess reactant or excess reagent. Clear? All other reactants are known as excess reactant. In this reaction, the oxygen is the limiting reagent because the oxygen reactant get finished first, and the other reactant, that is carbon, is the excess reactant. This is the carbon is the excess reactant or excess reagent. Clear? The next topic is determination of limiting reagent. Determination of limiting reagent. The first point is find out the ratio by mole coefficient of every reactant. The first point is find out the ratio by mole coefficient of every reactant. Clear? And the second point is a reactant with least ratio is limiting reagent. Clear? There are 2 points in determination of limiting reagent. The first point is find out the ratio by mole coefficient of every reactant, and the second point is a reactant with least ratio is limiting reagent. The question will be arise, what is coefficient? For example, suppose 2A reactant react with 3B reactant. There are two reactant A and B, to form AB. And here 2 is the coefficient of reactant A and 3 is the coefficient of reactant B. Clear? What is the coefficient? This is the coefficient of A and 3 is the coefficient of B. Clear? Now, how to calculate the limiting reagent? For example, in the question, 4 gram of hydrogen react with 16 gram of oxygen to form H2O. Clear? To form H2O. First, we have to balance the chemical reaction. Now, chemical reaction has balanced. How to calculate the limiting reagent? First, we have to calculate the number of mole of hydrogen and oxygen. The number of mole of hydrogen is equal to weight upon molecular weight. We know that mole is equal to weight upon molecular weight. Here mole is equal to weight. Weight of hydrogen is 4 divided by molecular weight is 2 and 2 mole of hydrogen, and the ratio of mole coefficient mole coefficient and the ratio of mole coefficient for hydrogen reactant is mole divided by coefficient. Mole of hydrogen is 2 and coefficient of hydrogen is 2, that is 1. The ratio of mole coefficient for hydrogen reactant is 1. Now we are calculating the number of mole for oxygen reactant. That is mole is equal to, for oxygen molecule, weight of 16 gram and molecular weight is 32. Now 0.5 mole of oxygen. Now we are calculating the ratio of mole coefficient for oxygen molecule. Ratio is equal to mole upon coefficient. Mole, number of mole for oxygen molecule is 0.5. 0.5 divided by coefficient. Coefficient is 1. Now 0.5 and the ratio is 0.5. According to the second point of determination of limiting reagent is the reactant with least ratio is limiting reagent. So least ratio is 0.5 for oxygen reactant. So oxygen is the limiting reagent because the ratio is least 0.5 and the ratio for hydrogen molecule is 1. So oxygen is the limiting reagent. Clear? This is the first question, which is based on the limiting reagent. This reaction is given in the question, and this reaction indicates that 3 mole of A react with 5 mole of B to give 7 mole of D. According to the question, if 21 mole of A react with 25 mole of B, then find out the limiting reagent and left mole of excess reagent. We know that what is the limiting reagent. Limiting reagent are those reagents which get finished first in multi-reactant reaction. Clear? And this is the solution, and this is the reaction which is given in the question. 3 mole of A react with 5 mole of B to get 7 mole of D. First, we have to find out the ratio of mole and coefficient of every reactant. The ratio of mole and coefficient of every reactant. This is the ratio of mole and coefficient of reactant A. Ratio is equal to 21. 21 is the mole of A, and divided by 3. 3 is the coefficient of reactant A, and this is the ratio of mole and coefficient of reactant B. 25, 25 is the mole of reactant B, and 5 is the coefficient of reactant B. Finally, we get the ratio. Ratio of A is equal to 7, and ratio of B is equal to 5. We know that the reactant with least ratio is limiting reagent. So 5 is the least ratio. So 5 is the ratio of reactant B. So B is the limiting reagent. Clear? We know that the reaction depends on the limiting reagent. It means that as soon as the limiting reagent gets finished, the reaction gets stopped. Hence, 5 mole of B since 5 mole of B react with 3 mole of A. 5 mole of B react with 3 mole of A. Therefore, 25 mole of B react with 25 mole of B react with how many mole of A? So it's equal to 3 into 25 divided by 5 is equal to 15 mole of A. It means that 25 mole of B react with 15 mole of A. Clear? Therefore, left mole, that is the left mole of excess reactant, is equal to 21 mole of A. That is the 21 mole of A. 21 mole of A is used in the reaction, minus 15, and 15 mole of A is consumed in the reaction. That is equal to 6 mole of A, and the left mole of reactant A, that is excess reactant, is equal to 6 mole. Clear? This is the answer. Left mole is 6 mole of A, and B is the limiting reagent. Clear? This is the second question, which is based on the limiting reagent. The reaction is given in the question. It indicates that 3 mole of A react with 5 mole of B to give 7 mole of D. According to the question, if 21 mole of A react with 25 mole of B, then what is the mole of D? Clear? This is the solution, and this reaction is given in the question. Clear? First, we have to find out the ratio of mole and coefficient of every reactant. We know ratio of is equal to mole upon coefficient of every reactant, and this is the ratio of reactant A. 21 is the mole of reactant A, and 3 is the coefficient of reactant A, and we get the ratio of reactant A is equal to 7. Now, and this is the ratio of reactant B. 25 is the mole of reactant B, and 5 is the coefficient of reactant B, and finally we get the ratio of reactant B is equal to 5. We know that the reactant with least ratio is limiting reagent, and the least ratio is 5 for reactant B. So the limiting reagent is reactant B, and we know that the reaction occurs on the basis of limiting reagent. It means that As soon as the limiting reagent finished, the reaction get stopped. Therefore, since 5 mole of B 5 mole of B gives 7 mole of D, then 25 mole of B means 25 mole of B gives how many mole of D, is equal to 25 into 7 divided by 5 is equal to 35 mole of D. It means that 25 mole of B gives 35 mole of D, and this is the answer. Clear?